Hi everyone, and welcome to day 4 of our agent training. Today we are going to talk about negotiations, bidding wars, kick-out clauses, and then in the second half of today we are going to go over the brand new Code of Ethics. Just to remind everyone, the PDF's manual for each of the days can be found in the Career Den, in the library, under PowerPoints, and then under agent training, and every single one of them is there, and also the PowerPoints are there, and eventually the recordings from these days will be in YouTube LAER training. So today we're going to start off talking about negotiation and keeping an open mind as to all of the different parts of negotiation. We talked about this a little bit with the attorneys as to what you say, who you're representing, and the components of the offer that you're presenting. So we are actually starting on page 8 of the manual, if anybody is following in that. In any real estate negotiation, buyers ask and sellers push back. How far buyers and sellers are willing to negotiate has a lot to do with the real estate market, their agent, and their personalities. While sellers want the highest price and buyers want the best deal, the two have to meet somewhere in the middle for a deal to close. Buying or selling a home often involves a great deal of emotion, and typically the best real estate agents are the ones who can look at the data and facts embedded into terms of the contract that are being negotiated to best counsel their clients on strategy. And again, remember which side you're representing. Remember that at the end of the day, the parties on either side of the transaction want pretty much the same thing. They both want to transfer ownership of the house. The negotiations start once the seller receives a written offer. Since everything is negotiable, agents ask the buyers and the sellers go back and forth in writing, whether the communication is via email or signed forms. The objective is agreement of the deal's terms, which includes price, timelines, contingencies, and items. And we're going to go over those. Remember, yesterday we talked about the components of an offer, and we used the example of a seller who wanted to wait until the year end so their kids could finish school where they were. So if you were writing an offer today or in March, a normal person might write an offer for 30 or 45 days. But your clients might say, we don't care if we wait till June. And so you put the end of June. You might win just because of the closing date you put in there, not necessarily because you were the highest price. So sometimes it isn't only about the price. It could be about another component that's in the offer. Some of the guidelines for what sellers and buyers ask for, again, could be price, closing costs, closing date, finance contingencies, home repairs, appraisal contingency, furniture, appliances, inspection, a lot of different things. We were just talking a minute ago about somebody who's moving to Arizona, and when you move cross-country, your move is done by the poundage. So if you're representing the seller, they might say, I just want to leave everything because the less I have to pack, the less I have to pay for. And you're putting the brakes on going, let's not give it away at the time of the listing. And we'll talk about that later. But that's where having the conversation and remembering who you're representing and how you're representing them helps. So let's look at the PowerPoint that we have up and talk about the art of negotiating. Negotiation is a method by which people settle differences. It is a process by which compromise or agreement is reached while avoiding argument and dispute. Again, remember, you as the agents, the buyer agent and the seller's agent, are facilitating the two clients coming together. Individuals understandably aim to achieve the best possible outcome for their position. However, the principles of fairness, seeking mutual benefit, and maintaining a relationship are keys to the successful outcome. Remember what it just said here a second ago. The clients are the ones that are going to be emotional in this. And so you're the one that has to stay focused on the facts and the fairness. Whoops, I skipped one. So the 3 principles of negotiating are strength, flexibility, and mindfulness. Educate your client on the market, the comps, and the competition. Separate the wants versus the needs of your client. That's a key for negotiating. What are your needs versus the wants are kind of secondary. You're going to be a good listener, but what are the needs? The best negotiators are creative ones. There's more than one way to skin a cat. And we're doing Stacey's PowerPoint. Would you like to do your PowerPoint?
It's up to you.
I'd love to have you do that. We just started it.
Awesome.
So we're talking about the principles of negotiation, strength, flexibility, and mindfulness. And I'd love to have you do that.
So I put this Art of Negotiating class together last year. And some of the things that I tell real estate agents to think about when it comes to negotiating is there's all different styles of negotiation in real estate. And some of you might have noticed that sometimes real estate agents come into a deal and like they're ready to start a fight with the other side from the very beginning of the transaction. That is not a great way, in my opinion, to run your business. So I always tell people to be cognizant when you're out doing deals on a daily basis. Like, you're going to be dealing with real estate agents at your own company, at other companies, all the time. And I think it's helpful to you in your business to have great relationships with the other agents from other firms, which means like attending events and stuff like that. So not thinking of the agent on the other side of the transaction as an adversary, because at the end of the day, you guys all want the same thing. You want to help get a buyer into a house and get a seller the property sold. So I know Susan already went through some of these, but some of the things that I tell people to think about when it comes to negotiating is principles of fairness, seeking a mutual benefit, and maintaining a relationship. So at the end of the day, like, it's not about like winning or losing. Everybody has to feel like they had some sort of win. Principles of negotiating: strength, flexibility, mindfulness. Strength is about educating your client on the market, the comps, and the competition. So when it comes to negotiating, especially say you're working with a buyer, think about like separating at the beginning, before you even get to a negotiating process. Think about like when you're working with your buyer, saying, okay, what are the must-haves? Like, what are the things that we must accomplish through a negotiation, and what are the things you would like to accomplish? Because what happens when you are in the middle of a negotiation on a transaction, like immediately emotions get involved. And when emotions are involved, all of a sudden what happens is stuff that didn't really matter to your client becomes a really big deal, because now they're emotionally tied to an outcome. So it's important, like at the beginning of a transaction, to say, all right, out of this, like what are the things that we know we have to have? So let's just say, for example, the house might be listed at $500,000, and your buyers say, I need to get this property for $480,000. It is a non-starter if I can't make it work at $480,000. And then they also say, like, in addition to that, what we'd like to see is we would like to see that they throw in the appliances, or what we'd like to see is that they're going to include that ride-on lawnmower in the transaction. Like, there's things that they might kind of like to have, but if you separate those at the beginning of the transaction, so that, and have it written down, like the wants, what they would like, and like the things that they have to have, it's going to be so much easier that when you're in the middle of a negotiation, where all of a sudden you're in the middle of it and the seller ends up saying, okay, we could see we're going to give the property for $480,000, but we're not going to do all these things. But you don't want to find yourself where your buyer now is all of a sudden like, well, we're not going to do the deal if we don't get the lawnmower. You want to have something that you can go back and say, wait a minute, that wasn't like hugely important to you before. These were the things that were important to you, such as price. So one of the keys to being an awesome negotiator is way ahead of the negotiation, separating out what it is that your client absolutely needs to make happen and what are the things that it'd be like the cherry on top if they actually can make it happen. I'll also say that the best negotiators are creative ones. Remember this, there's always more than one way to skin a cat. There's always a way to there might be another way to get the client what they're looking for than the way that seems most apparent. So for example, going back to that transaction, the $500,000 property, the buyers need it to happen at $480,000. They couldn't make, like, if it's any more than $480,000 for a price, we simply just can't afford it. So we're not willing to go anywhere above the $480,000. Well, there's other ways. So what are those buyers really saying to you when they say they can't afford $480,000? Most likely it's something to do with the payment on their property. So when it comes to negotiating, potentially there's ways or things you could do to get them what they want, even though it might not be a $480,000 price. Because what they're saying is they want a $480,000 price. What they mean is there's a certain mortgage payment that they feel comfortable with. So when it comes to negotiating, think, all right, if I think outside the box, how is there a way that maybe the buyer and the seller could get close to what they want, but it might not look like a $480,000 price. So, for example, I saw this kind of happen in a deal where they were stuck on price, and the buyer agent went back to the bank and said, okay, like, my buyers are stuck on the price because they feel like they need this particular mortgage payment. What other ways can we get the mortgage payment down so that if the seller is unwilling to move the price down, that they still feel comfortable with the payment? And the mortgage person gave them a bunch of different options. First of all, there's different types of rates. Right now, rates are very low. Like with rates in the threes, you don't see clients needing to go with an adjustable rate. But when rates are higher, that's always an option where the bank will say, you know what, they could do like a 5-year fixed rate and they're going to get an interest rate that's much lower than what the 30-year fixed rate is. But even today with low interest rates, there are still ways that you could tweak the mortgage payment so that it's not quite as high, even if the purchase price is higher than what they want. So for example, the one that I saw recently, the bank came back to the agent and said, oh, there's other ways we can work the private mortgage insurance. So private mortgage insurance is a fee that a buyer will pay. It's included in their monthly mortgage payment, typically if they have less than a 20% down. The mortgage insurance provides no benefit to the buyer who's paying it. It is an insurance that the mortgage company makes the buyer purchase so that if the buyer defaults on the mortgage, that the bank is getting some of their money back. So it's called private mortgage insurance. It benefits the bank, not the buyer, and it's expensive, and it's included in a monthly mortgage payment, typically if somebody is putting less than 20% down. So on this one transaction I was helping an agent with recently, he went back to the mortgage company and said, all right, we're stuck on price, but there's got to be a way we can make the deal work. Long story short, the mortgage person stepped in and say, here's some things you can do to tweak the PMI to get that mortgage insurance payment down. It involved an upfront payment. So typically the mortgage insurance is paid monthly, but there are other options available that are less conventional. And the mortgage guy said, you know what, if they pay some of that premium, their mortgage insurance premium up front, that's going to reduce the payment, and we can get them the payment they want, even though it's a $500,000 house versus a $480,000 house, so that in the end they get what they want. So the whole point of all of that is that you don't necessarily, don't assume that there's only one answer to get what you want when it comes to negotiating. Coach your clients to step into the shoes of the other party. Negotiations are often centered on money, but there's a lot underneath the dollar sign that is controlling the deal. Always negotiate. If there's no negotiation, no friction, the offering party will inevitably feel cheated. So just something to think about. I always say negotiate something, because sometimes, especially in a fast-paced market, if there's zero negotiation, that's why I see it during the summer when there's tons of bidding wars. Buyers go out, they put like these crazy offers on a property, they go substantially over, they don't ask for a home inspection, they don't ask for anything, and they get their offer accepted. And then what happens? The next day, they're like, oh boy, like, what did I do? I made a mistake. I didn't negotiate. So just something to think about as far as the mentality of a buyer or seller who chooses to not negotiate anything, that sometimes if there's zero negotiation in a transaction, or the person who didn't negotiate may end up getting buyer's remorse and saying, all right, maybe I made a mistake. Before any negotiation takes place, a decision needs to be taken as to when and where a meeting will take place to discuss the problem and who will attend. Setting a limited time frame is often helpful. I'll talk about more of that in a second. So think about this for buyer, if you're working with buyers. So first of all, and many agents don't do this, but if you're representing a buyer and you have an offer on a property and you know that maybe it's less than asking price, so you can, as long as it's okay with your client, you can always ask to present your offer to the seller. So you have to go through the other real estate agent to do that. But I always say that if there's an opportunity, and I would say for every 10 times you ask to present an offer, there might be 2 or 3 times that they're going to let you present your offer. Now, the other side, the seller has the right to not have you come in and present an offer. But do you think it's better for you if you can go present your own offer to a seller as a buyer agent? Definitely 100%. Because you can make sure that there is no gap in communication. Sometimes in our business, you say something and it's like that game of telephone, that by the time it actually gets to the person who you're trying to communicate, like something else totally has been said. So in a hot market, I think if there's any way that you can get in front of a seller, if you're working with the buyer, or getting on a conference call to answer any questions or concerns that seller might have, go for it. I also say you always have to discuss it with your buyer, but always ask. Like, if every time you're working with a buyer, you're writing an offer, just say, do you mind, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, if I suggest to the other agent that you would like me to present this offer directly to the seller? That's going to mean that I'm going to go to their house because I want to advocate for you. And I want them to know all the reasons why they should take this offer. Again, the other side will probably 70 to 80% of the time say no, because do they want you in front of their seller? Probably not, because it gives you a competitive advantage if you can get in front of the seller and advocate and make a case for your client. So some of the reasons why presenting your own offer is great is you are the one best suited to explain your offer to the seller. Not relying on a list agent's negotiating skills. So sometimes by hearing what the other side's objection is, or why the seller is uncomfortable accepting the offer as is, sometimes if you can hear it directly, you might be able to help. So for example, let's say that you have an offer on a property and your buyers are like, we gotta close the end of February or we can't make it work. And the sellers get the offer and say, well, we can't be out until the end of April. There's no way we can move. We're waiting for the kids to finish school, stuff like that. We can't be out till the end of April. Now, if there's multiple real estate agents involved, what could happen is that all of that gets lost in communication and a deal dies. So your people have to move by end of February. The other side says, that's a non-deal. My people are not moving. And then you come to a stalemate because nobody wants to change their closing date. But if you're in front of that seller and you can talk to them about it and say, well, maybe you present them other offers or other ideas. Say, for example, would you be open to temporary housing? Or do you have a family member that you can move with? The point is that if you don't hear that conversation or you don't hear the reasons, then it's going to be much more difficult to prevent that type of stalemate. The other thing about presenting offers is that you get nonverbal cues. So being in front of somebody, then you can read a lot more about what that person is saying than it through text or email or through a third party. And sometimes you can extract additional data. So information that you might not have otherwise realized. By the way, one thing I always say to buyer agents when you're negotiating is call the other side, the list agent. I think you should do this every single time. Call the other side, the listing agent, when you have a buyer that's working on a transaction. You call the list agent before you take an offer, and you say to the list agent, hey, I have clients that are super interested in this property, and how likely are they to move a little bit on the price? Now, should the selling agent answer that question? No. Absolutely should never. Do they answer the question? I'd say often, 30, 40, 50% of the time. That selling agent, just by you asking the question, it might give up a little information that could give you more negotiating power. So again, they're not supposed to answer that. They're supposed to not give any information about the seller. Another question you can ask to the list agent as a buyer agent. So what is their reason for selling the property? Why are they putting it on the market? Should the list agent tell you that answer? Absolutely not. Do they tell you? I'd say again, 30, 40, 50% of the time, you're gonna get the answer. Because let's just say that the list agent says, oh, they're putting it on the market because they're getting a divorce. Or they just got relocated to Texas. They're moving in 3 weeks. Is that good information for you to have when you're negotiating? By the way, if you're the selling agent, never give that information away. Absolutely do not give that information away, because it puts your client as if you're the selling agent, it puts your client at a tremendous disadvantage by giving up any information. And so always work in the best interest of whoever your client is. So again, if you're the buyer, and I say ask the question, because you would be totally surprised at the number of times you will actually get an answer to questions that the other side shouldn't necessarily be talking to you about. I always think this is a good idea. I actually posted on Facebook today. I think it's a great idea to have a buyer write a letter as to who they are and why they want to buy the house, and tell a little bit about who they are as human beings. So when you think about negotiations, what you want to try to get the other side, you want that other side to like stop thinking of the transaction as dollars and cents. You want to try to get the other side of the transaction to think of this emotionally and start to care about your client. So I love the idea of having your buyer write a heartfelt letter about who they are, including pictures as well. You can, as a seller, I've seen this done by sellers too. I went into a property in Billerica. I was helping an agent, and the seller had this beautifully well-written letter that was framed on the kitchen counter over by the listing sheets, and it was a letter about how much they loved this house, what they loved about the house, they had raised their family in the house. Like, it was just like a heartfelt letter about why this property had been amazing to them over 20 years. So it can go both ways. A seller can write a heartfelt letter about the property so buyers can see it, and vice versa. The buyers can write a letter about why they want to get the property. The more you can turn your negotiations into a story, the more advantageous it will typically be for your negotiating, because now you got the other side to not necessarily, like, as soon as the offer comes in, oftentimes like a seller is immediately like calculating numbers in their head, like, okay, how much money am I getting in my pocket? And by having a letter like that, it takes the focus off that to say, wow, like I want this family to be in this house because they're going to take care of my home. I also say, as a buyer agent, that it's always a good idea to run a market analysis on whatever property that you're taking an offer on. This can be done very quickly, like a tool like RPR. Yeah, you can quickly just do a RPR report and see roughly what the value is, especially if you feel the property is a bit overpriced. I was just talking to one of our agents in the Chelmsford office, and there's a property that she took an offer on. It's in Westford. This property has been sitting on the market for 200 plus days. So clearly it's overpriced. Her buyers did want it. And our agent did a full-blown CMA on the property and wrote like a very long, detailed explanation as to why they were offering significantly under the asking price. So basically, it's a way to increase negotiations into your favor, to get the other side to say, okay, I can see why they came in at this number because they've provided a market analysis. By the way, you don't necessarily have to give the market analysis to the other side right away. I would say when putting in an offer, especially if you're putting in less than asking price, to say, hey, I did a market analysis on this property and my value came in a bit lower. Have the conversation with the other side. And if the other side says, well, I want to see your market analysis, it's up to you, but you can give your market analysis. At the end of the day, like, a property typically needs to appraise. If your buyer's getting financing, which 95% of buyers are financing a property, that means a property is going to have to appraise. And although market analysis is not an appraisal, it's a good indicator of roughly what the property is going to appraise for. So sharing that with the other side to tell the listing agent, listen, we all want the deal to close, and at the end of the day, the property's going to have to appraise. I'd rather have the conversation now that it looks like it's going to be a bit high, And so we're coming in lower on the offer, but I feel like if we can put this together at this price, my comps are showing that there's a good chance that the property is going to appraise. Okay, talk about negotiating a little bit as a listing agent. So we're going to the other side. Yep.
I also opened your chapter in your book.
Okay.
You want to do that now?
That's all right.
Okay.
So now we're stepping in. We're representing the seller now. One of the cool negotiating tools that we have at our disposal as a listing agent, in my opinion, is talking to your sellers about doing a pre-listing home inspection. Now, definitely unconventional, but we have agents that are doing this very successfully in their markets. So what the pre-listing home inspection is all about is you go to your seller and you say, listen, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, it's a little bit unconventional, but this is what we know. On most transactions, there's going to be 2 rounds of negotiating. That means that we're going to put the property on the market. A bunch of people are going to come through. We're going to get an offer. You're going to be so excited because it came in close to what you wanted. And then I'm going to tell you, don't get your hopes up, because now the next thing that buyer is going to do is a home inspection. And once they do the home inspection, typically we're going to end up in a second round of negotiations. So one way that we can try to prevent a great deal of that, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, is to have you do the home inspection now. So what that entails is that I can give you a bunch of names to a bunch of home inspection companies in the area. You pick one, have them come out and do a full home inspection of your property. Now, the reason that's beneficial is that, first of all, that home inspector, they're almost always going to find stuff wrong with the property. And it might be stuff that you didn't even know is wrong. We are so much better off finding out now that there's stuff that needs to be done to the property than having the future buyer of your property figure it out. Because it is going to be far less expensive for you to go out and price and get that item fixed than if we tell a buyer that to go get us a quote and come back. So we're going to have the home inspector come out. They come up with a list of things that need to get done. And I'm going to advise you that if it's like a health or a safety issue, those ones we should concentrate, probably fix those right away. And then for anything that, the big things, sometimes there's stuff that sellers just don't want to invest in. So for example, maybe your roof only has another 5 to 10 years left on it. I wouldn't tell you to go get a roof at this point, but what I will do is when we have somebody that's interested in buying your property, what I'm going to do is tell them that we've already done an inspection on the property. We're happy to share that inspection with you. When you write your offer, we want you to write it knowing that we've already priced this, knowing that it's going to need a new roof in the next 5 to 10 years. I'm going to give you the inspection so that you can take a look at it. So when you write your offer, write it based on what you know is already wrong with the house, because our goal is to not negotiate a second time. Now, you're not telling the other buyer that they can't do a home inspection. What you're telling the other buyer is, I'm disclosing that first of all, every house has problems. We're disclosing every single nook and cranny problem that this house has because we've done a home inspection. We've priced it accordingly, knowing that the property has those issues. If you come back later, our intention is like, you already know what these problems are. We're not going through a second round of negotiations for items that you already know exist. So the idea of doing this is basically to eliminate that 2 rounds of negotiation on a typical transaction. So is it foolproof? No. It is possible that the buyer could have a second home inspector go out and that second home inspector finds something that the first home inspector didn't. But those issues, like that type of stuff, is rare. Typically what happens is the buyers put in an offer knowing that there's only 5 or 10 years on the roof. Like, it's very hard for them to come back and say, hey, we want $10,000 off the price because of the roof is going to eventually need to be replaced, because it has all been disclosed and it is transparent up front. We included this for those of you that use the 7 Secrets to Hiring a Lion book as a handout at listing and buyer presentations. There's a whole chapter in the book about pre-listing home inspections because I'm so passionate about it. When I started researching this, I found in many countries it's super normal for the seller of the property to get their inspection first, and then that inspection is just part of the handouts that they give to potential buyers. I think it just adds a layer of transparency to your transaction, because think about it from the buyers. I said a little while ago, always try to get into the other person's shoes. And sometimes on real estate transactions, there's such a cloak of secrecy on both sides that it creates like, all right, what are they hiding from me? Like, it creates trust issues. But as a seller, like if you think about it from the buyer's point of view, and you have a seller that says, hey, we know the house is built in 1960. We know the property's not perfect. Here's the list of what the home inspector found. In my opinion, many buyers are going to feel so much more comfortable doing that transaction, because they're not going to feel like, all right, what is this guy hiding on me? He just gave me his whole inspection. As a list agent, so now we're talking from the list agent's shoes again. I think it's not a bad idea that when you have somebody that says they're coming in with an offer, that you say, okay, we look forward to getting your offer. I'm emailing you my market analysis so that you know how we arrived at price. I feel very comfortable that the value is $500,000, and I'm telling you why. By doing that, it just creates an anchor. So an anchor is, I just read this great book on negotiating, and it's about anchors, that when you are negotiating with someone, like, you are so much better off being the first person to put price out there than letting the other person do it, because when you're the first one that talks about price, the other side automatically is got your number in their head, and they're trying to make the transaction work around the number you've already anchored out there. So I think it's a good idea that if you are a list agent, you have a CMA that supports the value for the property. Why not send it to the other side and say, we look forward to your offer. This might help your buyers feel very comfortable coming in at full price or higher, because I already have a CMA that's going to show them how we arrived at the value of the property. As a list agent, think about when you list the property, keep your red herrings off the table for now. So what I mean by that is you are listing a home, and the sellers say you can include like all the appliances. We don't want our refrigerator. We don't want like all the drapes, like all the stuff. So they say we really want to walk away. We don't want any of this stuff. I would still put into the listing agreement that like the refrigerator is not included, or the draperies are not included, because those are things that you could throw back into the transaction later. Like some of those things, like anything around the house that the seller tells you they don't care about, I would still show them as exclusions, because that's something we already know your seller doesn't care about them. But later on, when you're $5,000 apart on the price and you're negotiating back and forth, you could say, listen, my seller is not going to come down anymore on price. However, I told him that's going to put you guys in a very bad spot financially for after closing. So he's agreed to throw in the refrigerator so that you won't need to go shopping. So it's just kind of like a red herring. You knew from the beginning your seller really didn't care about the refrigerator. In fact, didn't want the refrigerator anyways. and now it's something that you could throw back in as a negotiating tool later on. Let's talk about preparing an offer. I already said this. Some of the active investigation questions you can make when before you write up an offer, asking the other side, how much is the seller willing to move on price? Again, the other side is not supposed to answer that question. There is a percentage of the time they do, so I say always ask the other side. Why is the seller selling? Again, they're not supposed to tell you, but you will find they do. If it's been on the market for a while, ask. Just say like, hey, why has this property been on the market for a while? Another question that they don't necessarily have to answer, but are there any other offers coming in? If a deal came off the market and then went back on, you can ask, why did it come back on the market? Ask them, what is the goal of the seller? Like, what does the seller really care about when we're writing an offer? So that's something that most buyer agents never ask. But think about it, like a property is listed, it's been on the market for 30 days, you're about to write an offer, and you say to the other agent, I'm going to be meeting the customers on Saturday, we're going to write an offer. What are some of the things that your client really cares about, so we could think about that as we're crafting an offer? You might have that other agent say, you know what, if we could get a closing in 30 days, they'd be very negotiable in price. So now you know that that seller cares more about a closing date than what they're going to end up with in their pocket. Also, I always say we're putting together a whole program just on like the due diligence and research you should do on every property, but you should research everything, like talk to the building department. By the way, it's a good idea. I learned this at a CE class. It's a good idea always just to Google the property address, because sometimes if you just simply Google the property address, you might find there was a fire there 5 years ago, and otherwise you wouldn't have even known it. So go down to the building department, check public records, Google the property address. And again, we're putting together a whole program just on what type of research you should do prior to putting an offer in, because sometimes you're going to find weird stuff, like just really weird, strange stuff that comes up that you really want to know about before you start negotiating on the deal. So interestingly, going back to my meeting with the agent earlier, the agent that took an offer on a property in Westford, significantly under. This property had been on the market for 200 days. She felt it was overpriced for her clients. She did a market analysis on the property. So the property has a ton of acreage that comes with the house. So potentially there's building lots available on the house. But still, she's like, it's still overpriced. Even if there are building lots, it's still priced too much, because a builder would have come in and scooped it up like months ago if it was easy to build on that lot. So anyway, she went and did research on the property, and what our agent learned just from research is that there's two almost extinct species of animals living on that land, because there was some sort of map overlay that they could do, and it was available through the town, and it showed that there are two almost extinct types of animals living on that land. Is that good information to know before you write an offer to a seller on the property? Definitely. So that's just part of what she included. A CMA on the property to show we don't think it's worth it anyways. Number two, you're trying to say in MLS that this potentially has buildable lots, but what we know is there's two almost extinct species of animals on this, which means it's definitely not going to be easy to turn these into to houses. So do some active investigation. Always look like how much did the seller pay. You can go into the registry of deeds as well to see if the person, like if any type of foreclosure notice has been sent to the seller. Because if you're a buyer agent, is that helpful to know that this guy has had foreclosure notices sent to the property? Now you know you might have some negotiating room. Call the town, the police department, and don't forget to Google. So like just keep gathering all this artillery, because this is the information you need to be a killer negotiator on this transaction. When it comes to people, the other side asking questions about your client, whether you're representing the seller or you're representing the buyer, you're not going to say very much about your client at all. Like, you don't want the other side to have very much information. You don't want the other side to know why your client is buying or selling. You don't want them to even, you really want them to know as little as possible, because it's going to affect the way they negotiate with you. Only disclose information when it's pertinent to your negotiations. And by the way, I want to add, when your client gives you the permission to disclose it. Because, for example, you're not supposed to disclose that your client is getting a divorce. If you've got their property listed, the only way you can disclose that is that your seller says, yeah, it's fine. Just tell them that we really need to sell quickly because we're going through a divorce. So make sure that your client knows and has given you permission for anything that you plan on disclosing to the other side. Then you're going to discuss strategy with the client. We talked about it earlier, their wants versus their needs, because we're going to come back to those later when we're in the heat of negotiation and everybody's emotions are high. We're going to talk about what is their end goal, like what they really want, where to start the negotiation. Beyond price, what are all the other things in your toolbox that you can negotiate on? So like I said earlier, like beyond price, there's things you can do to negotiate payments down, such as adjustable rates or negotiated like upfront PMI. What do they really care about, and what are all the pieces that you can kind of pull back in later? Price is always negotiable. Dates, so like that's always something you could say, all right, maybe if we go in with a faster closing date, we can get more off the property. Extras, especially if it's new construction or something, there's different things. I also always say, like when you're working with your buyer, look around the property, and if there's stuff that the buyer might really want, like include it in the offer. We just had a transaction that took place, and it was a big, beautiful house, and the buyer, it was our listing, and the buyer came in at an offer where they wanted everything, the furniture, everything. They wanted to be able to just move into the house the way it was. So why not just ask your buyer as they're looking around? You never know. And sometimes, even though you might not be able to negotiate on price, it helps makes your buyer feel like they won if they got some other stuff that they didn't think they were going to get, such as like this whole home came furnished. The biggest mistake some agents make is sometimes agents don't discuss a strategy at all. Like have a conversation with your buyer or seller and just let them know what your negotiating strategy is going to be. And have a dialogue about how you're going to handle it. Emotional control. So he who keeps his emotions in check wins. Always refer back to that wants versus needs list. So during a negotiation, it's wise not to take anything personally. If you leave personalities out of it, you'll be able to see opportunities more objectively. We see deals die all the time because emotions get very involved. Even you have to say to like your sellers or to your buyers, like sometimes sellers just take it very, very personally when somebody comes in with a low offer. Like they take it so personally that they're like, all right, done, not even talking to that buyer ever again. Whereas you might have had a great buyer that was like willing to go back and forth and was just kind of testing to see if there was any appetite for a lower offer. So you have to have those conversations with your buyer and your seller to say, listen, you cannot let emotions get the best of you in negotiations, because typically when you do, you lose. I love this. Grant Cardone is like a trainer and coach. One of the things I love about what he says, every time you disagree with the other side, you add a brick onto the wall you're building between the two of you. So what Grant Cardone says is always agree with whatever the other side is saying. You can counter their disagreement. However, like just to say, yes, I agree with you, it takes the other side's guard down a little bit. So just something to think about in negotiations. I have a 10-year-old that listens to Grant Cardone all the time because her father listens to Grant Cardone training every day. And it's awesome to watch her negotiate for what she wants, because she uses the Grant Cardone on her father to always win what she wants. So I see her like agree with him on stuff and then turn that agreement, like I know she doesn't agree with what he's saying, so she'll agree with him so that now they're on the same side, and then she'll still counter with what exactly she wants and why it's better to give her what she wants. Enemy or advocate? This goes back to talking about the agent on the other side of the transaction. What I'll tell you about the real estate business is the more friends you have in real estate, the easier your life will be, the more deals you'll put together. If you go into transactions, and these real estate agents exist in every market, where there are real estate agents that come in and it is a fight from the minute you pick up the phone and start like looking at the property. It's a fight with that person. You're just going to have a much more difficult time selling real estate if you look at other real estate agents as the enemy. The more friends you have, I guarantee you'll be in multi-bidding war situations. You want other agents to look at you and say, hey, I'm excited to work with Stacey again. So I know it's going to be a nice, easy deal. So is it possible that your offer gets accepted, even though it's lower than another offer, because you're you? I say 100% yes. I see that deals go together because the agent knows that if I work with this agent and can articulate it to their seller to say, listen, I know there's difference in price, but what I know is I've worked with this agent before and they're going to be tough on home inspection. It's going to be a fight all the way to the closing. And by the way, we're going to be really lucky if we ever get to closing. But what I can tell you about this agent, yeah, the offer is a little bit lower than the other one. Maybe we can try to counter and go a little higher. But what I know is this agent's great to work with. They're going to be super transparent, and that deal's going to go to closing. 100%. I think if you have a great reputation, I know if you have a great reputation in this business, it's going to get deals done for you. So, some other things to think about when you are negotiating. I try to be hyper vigilant about this in all aspects of business, but little words you use can have an impact on getting your deals together. So like instead of saying, if this deal goes together, when you're talking to the other agent, you say, okay, when this deal goes together. You want to act as if you've already put the deal together. No matter how tough the negotiations get, always assume the deal will get done. Make it clear multiple times throughout negotiations that, hey, you want to sometimes, especially if emotions are high, you want to remind everybody we're all trying to get to the same point. The buyer, the seller, like our goal for everybody is that on February 28th, we're all going to end up at the closing table. So sometimes you have to put consistent reminders into the other side, like, hey, we're all on the same side. So take it down a notch. Use positive wording when talking to clients, attorneys, and other agents. So assumptions, like assuming that it's going to close. A different way to the same end, this goes a little bit to what I talked about earlier. Buyer and seller are at a stalemate and they are $10,000 apart. That's $40 a month in mortgage. So what are other ways in which the buyer could save $40 a month? Because what I want you to think about is when you are doing a transaction, like you're not just having to help get your buyer or your seller to the right mindset. Sometimes you have to coach the other agent on things that they could say to their client to help them move their client in the right direction. So like $40 a month, what are other ways that the buyer could save $40 a month? So, I mean, we see deals all the time that like die over $40 a month. So somebody walks away from the home of their dreams over $40 a month. So you have to be the one to be able to say to your client, like, every time we've had a meeting, I see you with a Starbucks coffee. If you could give up that habit, you can have the home of your dreams. Like, try to get them into a mindset that they're losing the house that they really want over a small investment. And sometimes it's just coaching the other side, the other agent, to have that conversation with their client. Sam, this is what we talked about last week, home sale contingencies. First of all, I always say to people in general, I should have said this when we were talking about like research and stuff. When you are representing a seller and offer comes in, you should always ask the other side if there's a home to be sold. Most people would make that no. Of course, like if you have a home that needs to get sold, the right thing to do is to put in a home sale contingency in the offer. However, there are sometimes agents that will not put that into the offer because getting an offer accepted with a home sale contingency, which means that the buyer who's putting an offer in on a property has to sell that house first before they can buy this house. So when an offer comes in, no matter what, I always say one of the first things to ask the other side, is there any house, do they have to sell a house? Because even if you don't see it on that offer, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, because sometimes what real estate agents do is they rely on the mortgage contingency clause. In other words, they write up a whole offer, they submit, you have no idea that there's a house for sale on the other side, and then 30 or 45 days in, they say, oh, we're sorry, they couldn't get financing. What? What do you mean they couldn't get financing? Well, their other house didn't sell, and they can't afford 2 mortgage payments. So you have to be careful that that doesn't happen. That's not, as an agent, you shouldn't do that. You should always disclose if there is a home sale contingency. There are specific forms on how to handle home sale contingencies. If a property comes in with a home sale contingency, typically what you'll see is a 48-hour kick-out clause. Usually that the other side will say, okay, well, we'll accept the offer, but we're going to keep marketing the home. And if another buyer comes in, we're going to give you 48 hours to make a decision of either removing your home sale contingency or backing out of the deal. Multiple offer situations. So what happens when you have multiple offer situations? Some agents don't love this, but if you find that you as a buyer agent are in a multiple offer, I always try to ask if you can present your offer. If you can present your offer to the seller, regardless of what all the other offers are, you are going to be in a much better place than the agents who are not getting in front of the seller. Most likely the other agent's going to tell you, no, the seller does not want you to present the offer. You're going to have to put it in like everybody else. So next thing to do is you could put an offer in saying that your client's willing to pay $2,500 over the next highest offer, not to exceed a specific price. So like that, basically your buyer doesn't know what their offer is going to get accepted for, because it really ends up being how high the person before him went. By the way, if you're going to do that, I always say $2,500 over the next highest offer, not to exceed whatever, $500,000, and that other offer can't have a home sale contingency, because most in a bidding war, seller is not going to want to accept an offer anyways with a home sale contingency. So any offers that have home sale contingencies should not be included in there. Sometimes agents don't like these. List agents will just come back and say, we're not playing with like a offer like that, because there's all kinds of potential problems with an offer like that one, $2,500 over your best offer. Because at the end of the day, if your client is financing the home, the property needs to appraise. So you really should not do an offer like that if your client is financing the property, because potentially it could go so high that it's not going to appraise, which means that they're not going to be able to get the property anyways. So some of the things I want to recap, we talked about the principles of fairness, seeking mutual benefit. You guys are always you have to just remember that even though you're representing a buyer, like your goal is the same as the seller, to end up at the closing table. And maintaining a relationship. So not only do you want to maintain a good relationship with your buyer, in my opinion, you want to maintain a lifelong relationship with that other agent, because the next time you come in with an offer from that agent, you want them to say, you know what, Mr. Seller, we're going with this one. Like, this is the better deal because this is the more educated agent. This agent's going to be a pleasure to work with. The 3 principles of negotiating: strength, flexibility, mindfulness. Like, the mindfulness piece is just remembering, like, if you can always try to, especially when emotions are high, try to get your client to just put themselves in the shoes of the other side, and try to have them say, well, if you were the seller on this, even though you're the buyer, if you were the seller, what would you come back and say? Separate wants versus needs. You're going to be able to come back to that later in your negotiating when emotions are high, because I will tell you, in the middle of a heated negotiation on a piece of real estate, emotions are high. All those little things that weren't important to your client now become like massive things that are so important. So you want to have that list that you can refer back to. The best negotiators are the creative ones. There's always more than one way to skin the cat. Even though your buyer's saying, I can't go over $450,000. Really, that's talking more about a monthly payment. So there's more ways to work on negotiating by concentrating on that monthly payment and not on the price of the property. Buyer agents request to present offers to try to control the negotiations. On the list side, do a pre-listing home inspection to control negotiations. Do an active investigation by asking the other side questions. Always, always, always ask the other side, the list agent, the buy agent, ask them the questions that they're not supposed to answer. Why is your person selling? What matters to them? Why is the property sat on the market? How come the property came back on the market? When emotions are out of control, go back to your wants versus needs list. Always agree with the other side so that you're not building a wall. Don't get roped into a home sale contingency without knowing it. So when those offers come in, just say, hey, is there a property that needs to be sold here that I need to know about? By the way, when that does happen, one other key point is if you're a listing agent and you're accepting an offer on a property that has a home sale contingency, that those people have another property to sell, the first thing you should do is a market analysis of that property that is being sold. Before you advise your seller to take an offer on a property, to accept an offer on a property where the buyers have another house to sell, you should not do that until you have investigated the house that is being sold to make sure it is priced properly. I can't tell you how many times I've seen agents advise their seller, all right, we're going to take the offer, this is a great offer. And then when they go look, now they've got a contract, so now you're stuck in it. They go look at that other property. They're like, holy cow, that's $80,000 overpriced. That house is never going to sell. So before you ever educate your seller to accept a home sale contingency, you've got to do your due diligence on that other property. And then also prepare your buyers for multiple offer situations. I think it depends on the marketplace. Every market's different. Right now in the North Shore, we're in the middle of January and there's still bidding wars on properties. That's a conversation you should be having before you even take people out to buy their property. Like, have a candid discussion about how you are going to help them win a bidding war. Two of my favorite books when it comes to negotiating are these two, Getting to Yes and Crucial Conversations. Getting to Yes, I took an awesome negotiating class in law school, and this was the book they used, which is all about trying to get the other side to kind of agree with what you're looking. And then Crucial Conversations is also an awesome book about having candid conversations with people, but it all applies to negotiations as well. So that's it on our negotiating piece today.
Thank you.
Yes.
The other point I wanted to add to what Stacey just said, when I have someone listing a house and they want to start looking, I always say to them, the other agent is going to, if we present an offer that has a home sale contingency, the other agent is going to ask, is the home on the market? How well is it listed? How aggressively is it listed? And how are you marketing it? So they're going to go in and look at that. And so that, I think that's your job as the agent, is to protect your seller with that information. And I always say that when they're putting the house on the market, I'm like, we need to price this aggressively. You need to be in the market, not chasing the market, which is what you always say.
Yes, absolutely.
We're now going to switch gears and go into talking about the brand new Code of Ethics that has just come out January 1st of this year. And we're actually going to do this collectively. How do I get down to the... How do I get to the PowerPoint? Huh? I'm trying to get to the PowerPoint program again.
So minimize that window.
I'll minimize this. Now we go. There we go. Okay, so as of January 1st this year, we have a brand new Code of Ethics that has been updated, and we're going to go through it very quickly, point by point. This is the Code of Ethics for all of us to live by in everything that we're doing, and this is done by the National Association of Realtors. So there it is in the first slide in its abbreviated form, but we're going to go through each one, which I've written a slide for. There is a preamble to it, and we should all understand that when we pay our National Association of Realtors dues, what are we representing? We've gone over the buyer presentation, and we will be going over the listing presentation. And as you saw in the slides there, Stacey goes into several slides of trying to explain to our client what the meaning is of working with a realtor. It's important that we understand who we are as realtors, and this explains that. And this is words to live by, it really is. So Article 1, I only did some of them. We're doing the highlights of each of these. Maybe I'll sit down. So Sam, would you like to read the first one?
Article 1, Standard of Practice, 1-3. Realtors, in attempting to secure a listing, shall not deliberately mislead the owners as to market value.
So that's important. We need to, I think that's self-explanatory, but obviously it's very important to understand that everything has to be transparent and that you are not misrepresenting or misleading anything. Go ahead, Sam.
Realtors may represent the same transaction only after full disclosure to and with informed consent of both parties.
We talked about this with the attorneys earlier this week. Again, even Stacey mentioned it today. Only with the consent can you share that information.
Realtors shall submit offers and counter-offers objectively and as quickly as possible.
Time is of the essence. A nice little exception to that is you might ask the other agent, well, maybe you won't, but they might give the information that their client is away on a business trip. Now we have such a technology world that you can be doing dot loop or fax or whatever from your hotel, but you might want to find out, well, one of the parties is traveling 18 hours to Japan on business, so you need to give us a little time or something like that. So find out. Again, this is where the good communication with the other broker is key to that. Would you like to take the next one?
Sure. Standard of Practice 1.7. When acting as listing brokers, realtors shall continue to submit the seller, landlord, all offers and counter-offers until closing or execution of a lease unless the seller, landlord has waived this obligation in writing.
And that is the law, that they can continue to receive offers. It really isn't. Would you like to speak to that? It isn't done.
Yeah. Honestly, once a property's, for the most part, once a property is under agreement in MLS, you're typically not even showing the property anymore, and most people are not going to write another offer, but it is, occasionally you might see a backup offer, but that's all it can really be, is a backup offer.
And if they were dying for the house and they want to put a backup offer in and say, just, if something does happen and their financing falls through or whatever. Okay, go ahead.
Practice 1.11. Realtors who are employed to maintain or manage a client's property shall exercise due diligence and make reasonable efforts to protect it against reasonably foreseeable contingencies and losses.
So the maintenance, that is an important factor, not to neglect it. So that's an obligation that should be understood, certainly. Jordan?
Article 1, Standard of Practice 112. When entering into listing contracts, realtors must advise sellers, landlords of 1, the realtor's company policy regarding cooperation and the amounts of any compensation that will be offered to subagents, buyer, tenant agents, and or brokers acting in legally recognized non-agency capacities. 2, the fact that buyer, tenants, agents, or brokers, even if compensated by listing brokers or by sellers, landlords, may represent the interests of buyers, tenants, and 3, any potential for listing brokers to act as disclosed dual agents, buyer, tenants, agents.
And the subagents shouldn't be in there anymore anyway, right?
And this is all in MLS, yeah.
Yeah. So that's a lot, but again, it's really understanding representation and it's just continually reminding us. Standard of Practice 113. When entering into buyer-tenant agreements, the realtors must advise potential clients of 1. The realtor's company, is that the same thing or is that different? That was 12, this is 13. The realtor company's policy regarding cooperation, the amount of compensation being paid, but the potential for adding or offsetting compensation from other brokers, from the seller or landlord, any potential for the buyer-tenant representation to act as a disclosed dual agent, and the possibility that sellers or sellers' representatives may not treat the existence, terms, or conditions of offers as confidential unless confidentiality is required by law, regulations, or by confidentiality agreement between the parties. Sam.
Standard Practice 115. Realtors, in response to inquiries from buyers or cooperating brokers, shall, with the seller's approval, disclose the existence of offers on the property. Where disclosure is authorized, realtors shall also disclose, if asked, whether offers were obtained by the listing licensee, another licensee in the listing firm, or by a cooperating broker.
That's an interesting one. Some people might say, why would you even ask if it was an offer within your firm or within another firm? Why would it matter? But
It shouldn't matter, but it
yeah,
does.
I guess people might think about that. Okay, go ahead.
Standard of Practice 2.1, realtors shall be obligated to discover and disclose adverse factors reasonably apparent to someone with expertise in those areas required by their real estate licensing authority. Article 2 does not impose upon the realtor the obligation of expertise in other professional or technical disciplines.
Yeah, so that's a heavy one. In essence, we are not experts. We're going to learn this next week when Tiger comes, for one thing. We are not expert home inspectors. So we should not be the people disclosing that there's a defect in something or other. We are a real estate agent. We are only knowledgeable in what we are knowledgeable in. And I think that we should remember where that understanding ends and what we are not experts of. And to say, if they ask you a question about that, say, we can have someone in, just like we talked about the lead paint, even the lead in the water, have an expert in that area come in to talk about that. Jordan?
Standard of Practice 3.1. Realtors acting as exclusive agents or brokers of sellers, landlords, establish the terms and conditions of offers to cooperate. Unless expressly indicated in offers to cooperate, cooperating brokers may not assume that the offer of cooperation includes an offer of compensation. Terms of compensation, if any, shall be ascertained by cooperating brokers before beginning efforts to accept the offer of cooperation.
So it's a separate conversation from the terms of the offer, and are usually straightforwardly put forward in the listing. Standard of Practice 3.2. Any change in compensation offered for cooperative services must be communicated to the other realtor prior to the time that realtor submits an offer to the purchase, lease of property. After a realtor has submitted an offer or to purchase or lease a property, the listing broker may not attempt to unilaterally modify the offered compensation with respect to that transaction. I can speak to that. I don't know if anyone else has had that happen. I have seen agents include a copy of the MLS listing in their offer so that it shows that on the day that they showed the property, what the compensation was that was offered. If you look in the history of listings, sometimes you'll see that the cooperating compensation has gone up and down and fluctuated. It's important that at the time that you're writing the offer that you understand what that compensation is, and exactly as it's saying here, that compensation is then not later changed. So for you to add a copy of the MLS listing, the copy of the printout, which would be the full copy that includes the compensation is kind of a good proof to what is expressed. Did everybody get that? Understand that? Yes. Jordan, did you get that? No, go ahead. Ask your question.
I'm sorry, I drifted off.
So it might be a seller that changes his mind in how he wants the commission given. He may have stated at the time he did a listing, but he may change his mind. It doesn't happen that often, but I have seen it go from 3% cooperating to 2.5%, and then it might go back up again because they haven't any showings in 2 weeks. You want, at the date that you made the appointment and showing time, showed the house and wrote the offer, you want to know that on that date it was 3%. So you're printing out a copy of the MLS listing to prove that that is what was stated by the listing agent on the date that you showed the house. Sam?
Is that referring to the date that you showed the house or when the offer was submitted? Because based on the wording, it says after a realtor has submitted an offer to purchase, not when you're showing it. So let's say I go show property, right? And for some reason I disclose that my clients absolutely love this house to the listing agent, and they go and change it.
Yeah, you could technically have an issue.
Because the commission shouldn't matter in a way to you showing the house or submitting an offer on behalf of your client.
Yeah.
So at least I would say that on the day that you showed it, you made the appointment through showing time. So that was the point. You showed it. They know you showed it that date. They know that you looked at the listing sheet in MLS and saw that it was 3%. So between that moment, it might be Sunday that you did that, and then on Tuesday you write the offer. It's obviously unethical for them to do it after they've known that you had interest in the property. And let's hope that they don't do it, because that wouldn't be very fair. Standard practice 3-3 does not preclude the listing broker and cooperating broker from entering into an agreement to change cooperative compensation. So that says it does not preclude the listing broker and the cooperating broker. Again, it would have to be a very individual case, and it would have to be acknowledged and accepted by both sides, and I don't even know an example of that.
I've tried before.
Yeah. The parties can decide to
Yeah,
change
they
the
can.
compensation.
Right. Jordan. Oh, I'm sorry, not Sam.
Realtors acting as listing brokers have an affirmative obligation to disclose the existence of dual or variable rate commission arrangements. Example, listings where one amount of commission is payable if the listing broker's firm is the procuring cause of sale, lease, and the different amount of commission is payable if the sale lease results through the efforts of the seller, landlord, or a cooperating broker. The listing broker shall, as soon as practical, disclose the existence of such arrangement to potential cooperating brokers, and shall, in response to inquiries from cooperating brokers, disclose the differential that would result in a cooperative transaction or in a sale lease that results through the efforts of the seller/landlord. If the cooperating broker is a buyer-tenant representative, the buyer/tenant representative must disclose such information to the client before the client makes an offer to purchase a lease.
I mean, I definitely understand it. I'm not sure if I've ever seen that happen. We don't have variable rates hardly as much as we used to in shown. And the disclosure, I mean, that would be a great one to say if you had a show of hands across the United States, how many people even understand that they should disclose that?
I see it in MLS under firm remarks you can disclose. So basically what it means is if you've made a deal with your client that whatever your commission is, let's just say it's 5%, but if you bring in an offer you're getting 4%, that you're basically discounting the commission, that needs to be disclosed in I think in MLS under firm remarks. Because that does happen a lot.
And remember that if that is the true and right way to do it, which is what we're reading, Code of Ethics, the true and right way to conduct your life, how many people don't have code of ethics memorized, and how many times should they have put the disclosure in there, and they haven't.
Or they're
So-
not realtors.
I mean, thank goodness we're going over this so that at least we're all ahead of the game by having a better understanding of it. When seeking information from another realtor concerning property under management or listing agreement, realtors shall disclose their realtor status and whether their interest is personal or on behalf of a client, and if on behalf of a client, their relationship with the client. I just had this happen the other day when an agent asked me, he is related to the seller, so he's listing the property and the seller's his brother or something like that. So yes, you do have to disclose that, yeah. Realtors shall not misinterpret the availability of access to show or inspect a listed property. So we talked about this the other day in the rentals. Actually, that was in fair housing too, that you cannot change the terms of access for any reason, or misrepresent it. I think especially in rentals nowadays, they're doing more group showings just because it's easier on the tenants in the building, but you've got to put that in MLS, state when the first open house is or when the group showing is, and have it be consistent, and you can't make an exception when somebody calls and says, oh, I can't wait till Saturday, my client has to get on Thursday. That's not fair to what you've written in MLS and what the people are expecting by waiting until Saturday to go. Is it your turn?
Realtors shall not acquire an interest in or buy or present offers from themselves, any member of their immediate families, their firms, or any member thereof, or any entities in which they have ownership interest. Any real property without making their true position known to the owner or the owner's agent or the broker. In selling property they own or in which they have any interest, realtors shall reveal their ownership or interest in. Writing to the purchaser or to the purchaser's representative. Standard practice 4.1, for the protection of all parties, the disclosures required by Article 4 shall be in writing and provided by realtors prior to the signing of any contract.
Get that, Jordan? It's a lot to take in. It's saying you have to disclose that. You have to be transparent about it. I'd like to say it's not a big deal, but there may be people that forget that they need to do that and make it known so that it's out there. Article 5, realtors shall not undertake to provide professional services concerning a property or its value where they have a present or contemplated interest unless such interest is specifically disclosed to all affected parties. Again, disclosing and being transparent about that. Sam?
Article 6. Realtors shall not accept any commission, rebate, or profit on expenditures made for their client without the client's knowledge and consent. When recommending real estate products or services, homeowners insurance, warranty programs, mortgage financing, title insurance, realtors shall disclose to the client or customer to whom the recommendation is made any financial benefits or fees other than real estate referral fees the realtor or realtor's firm may receive as a direct result of such recommendation.
Again, it sounds so simple. It's just saying that you've got to be honorable in what you're doing, and if you had a relative that had one of these programs, you need to disclose that you have a relationship that way. Jordan.
Article 9, realtors for the protection of all parties shall assure whenever possible that all agreements related to real estate transactions, including but not limited to listing and representation agreements, purchase contracts, and leases are in writing in clear and understandable language expressing the specific terms, conditions, obligations, and commitments of the parties. A copy of each agreement shall be furnished to each party to such agreements upon their signing or initialing.
Yeah, and that's an all-encompassing statement that just says that everything needs to be clear and clearly stated and written and understood. And it's like we discussed with both of the attorneys that have been here this week, that if you have any questions about the representation in the legal documents, ask the advice of an attorney. Don't overstep your bounds as an agent and try to do a legal explanation. Always suggest that they get the advice of an attorney. Article 10. Realtors shall not deny equal professional services to any person for reasons of race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, national origin, sexual orientation, or gender identity. Realtors shall not be parties to any plan or agreement to discriminate against any person or persons on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, national origin, sexual orientation, or gender identity. And this was amended in 2014. Realtors in their real estate employment practices shall not discriminate against any person or persons on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, national origin, sexual orientation, or gender identity. Again, this is why we are where we are today, is because of the foundation that we laid at the beginning of the week about fair housing. Sam.
Article 11. When realtors prepare opinions of real property value or price, they must 1. Be knowledgeable about the type of property being valued. 2. Have access to the information and resources necessary to formulate an accurate opinion. And 3. Be familiar with the area where the subject property is located, unless lack of any of these is disclosed to the party requesting the opinion in advance.
So, I know of an agent in our company who is very honest, overly honest, and I absolutely appreciate it, that she will say, I am not knowledgeable about that area, but I can refer you to another LAER agent who is. And I think that that's a commendable trait, because if you are not an expert in that neighborhood, don't claim to be. And she lives by that. She feels very strongly about that. And not that we all shouldn't. I'm just saying she comes to mind. But we can all talk to each other and refer things. We see it every day within the company that you might be in Chelmsford and you're wondering if there's an agent in Winchendon that can help you with something. So, do that. Get somebody that can be the best help and representation for the agent. Jordan.
Standard of practice 12.4. Realtors shall not offer for sale, lease, or advertise property without authority. When acting as listing brokers or as subagents, realtors shall not quote a price different from that agreed upon with the seller/landlord. Standard of practice 12.5. Realtors shall not advertise nor permit any person employed by or affiliated with them to advertise real estate services or listed property in any medium, e.g., electronically, print, radio, television, etc., without disclosing the name of that realtor's firm in a reasonable and readily apparent manner, either in the advertisement or in electronic advertising via a link to a display with all required disclosures.
So let's separate these two. The first thing that comes to mind in 12-4 is when you're sitting with a seller that you're going to list their property, you're going to explain to them how you're going to advertise the property. And simple things that might be simple to us, like, of course, the social media advertising and putting in an MLS, but things like a sign, things like a just listed postcard to the neighborhood. And that's when they might stop and say, I don't want my neighbors to know that the house is for sale. And you're like, okay, you're putting your house on the market, but you don't want the neighbors to know. So but you've got to have their permission to do the full and complete and thorough job that you're offering to do for them. So that's a conversation that you need to have. Do you have anything to add to that? On the second part, definitely about everything that you do should say LAER Realty Partners. What did I say at the beginning of the week about branding, which we really haven't gotten into? You're always branding yourself, the team, if you work for a team, and the company. Always that. And everything that I post, when I finish the post, I always put pound LAER Realty Partners, pound LAER Training, whatever it is. Always should have the broker's identification on it. And the rules about that are a little different in New Hampshire. They're a little bit more strict about the telephone number of the broker office as well. But again, I find these things so easy to understand, but it's the way that we should be living every day. Okay, go ahead.
Realtors, when advertising unlisted real property for sale or lease in which they have an ownership interest, shall disclose their status as both owners, landlords, and as realtors or real estate licensees.
Oh, let's stop with that one. So if a realtor was selling their own house, but not doing it through MLS,
They have to disclose they're a realtor.
they still have to disclose that they're a realtor. Interesting. I mean, not that isn't right, but I wonder how many don't do that. Okay, go ahead.
Only realtors who participated in the transaction as the listing broker or cooperating broker, selling broker, may claim to have sold the property. Prior to closing, a cooperating broker may post a sold sign only with the consent of the listing broker.
Interesting that they even add that, and I'm sure that's a subjective thing that happens 100 different ways. I mean, I have seen the signs on the property sold by, but you certainly have to ask the permission of the seller. And are you not allowed to put that on there until the day of the closing? Then the new people move in, and do they still want the sign there? I'm sure it happens 100 different ways, right? Article 16 does not preclude realtors from making general announcements to prospects describing their services and terms of their availability, even though some recipients may have entered into agency agreements or other exclusive agreements with another realtor. So, to me, that's saying, if you were doing a general farming to an area, by doing general farming, you are not interfering with the relationship that a listing agent may have with a selling agent. So you do a general farm to a subdivision and there's a house listed in there. Well, yeah, they're going to get the general farming piece of paper or the Roar newsletter, but you didn't deliberately try to interfere with the relationship that person already has. A general telephone canvass, general mailing, or distribution addressed to all prospects in a given geographic area or in any given profession, business club, or organization or other classification or group is deemed general for purposes of this standard, just what I just said. Article 16 is intended to recognize as unethical two basic types of solicitations. First, telephone or personal solicitations by property owners who have been identified by a real estate sign, multiple listing compilation, or other information service having exclusively listed their property with another realtor. I thought you had a question. Okay. Where did I leave off? And second, mail or other forms of written solicitation of prospects whose properties are exclusively listed with another realtor when such solicitations are not part of a general mailing but are directed specifically to property owners identified through compilations of current listings for sale for rent signs and other sources of information required by Article 3 and MLS rules to be made available to other realtors under offers. So we talked about this before. Remember I talked about the listing that was temporarily withdrawn and not completely expired, do not touch. You want to make sure that you are not interfering with a relationship that an agent has with a seller until they are out of that relationship completely. If you're doing general, I love the way they kept saying general. If you're doing general farming, then you're not interfering with that. I mean, obviously the person whose house is listed is going to wonder why that's coming, but go for it.
So in general farming, right?
Yes.
What if you happen to know that there is certain houses expiring or being withdrawn in a geographical location, and you send out a mass mailer to the whole geographical location?
You're
that
saying,
falls
what do
within.
you mean? You said they are expiring?
Well,
You mean about to
correct, and
end?
you can still see the data.
But your mailers usually have a disclosure at the bottom
okay.
that say
Not
if
meant
if this property is currently listed,
It's not meant
please.
to be a solicitation.
Right.
Yes.
Okay,
Right.
gotcha.
Yep,
Perfect.
go ahead.
Okay. I'm very new, as you
Yes,
know.
go ahead.
Every night, I go through MLS and I call the expired and I call the withdrawn.
Good for
How
you.
am I going to know what's temporarily withdrawn and what is
So,
absolutely
what did I
withdrawn?
say yesterday? Oh, you weren't
I
here.
wasn't able
Sorry.
to come yesterday.
That your best coverage is always to go into property history. Property history is going to let you know, and the story of what I went through with my one seller was a great one. I kept looking in property history. That agent had told my eventual seller, "Oh yeah, it's out of MLS. It's out of MLS." It wasn't at all. It was only temporarily withdrawn. So he was not being honest with the owner of the home. So until you see that it's either withdrawn, expired, or anything like that, you're not free to contact them.
And you're not supposed to call withdrawals.
You're not supposed to
No.
call withdrawn.
No, because that is not a canceled contract.
It's not, yeah.
A canceled contract and an expired contract, there's no contract.
Okay,
We have had agents that have called by accident thinking it's an expired, but it's been relisted, which you can just say, I'm sorry, I didn't realize the property was listed. Good luck with your agent, but you're not supposed to call a withdraw.
okay.
Yeah, it has to be fully, the relationship has to
Don't
be,
think I called any just
No.
withdrawals. I'm not sure though, so I'm gonna be
Yeah.
extra vigilant.
but it has, yeah, I mean, property history is just, it's such a
Okay.
quick thing to do. You go to Tools and MLS PIN
Yep.
and just put the address in, and you're
Okay.
gonna see, expired or canceled. And
Okay.
then you're free to do it. And don't forget that Stacey has wonderful scripts in there for the expireds. They're really, really great to help you with what to say. Did I finish this here? I guess I did. Okay, Sam.
Realtors shall not solicit a listing which is currently listed exclusively with another broker.
There you go.
However, if the listing broker, when asked by the realtor, refuses to disclose the expiration date and nature of such listing, for example, an exclusive right to sell, an exclusive agency, open listing, or other form of contractual agreement between the listing broker and the client, the realtor may contact the owner to secure such information and may discuss the terms upon which the realtor might take a future listing, or alternatively, may take a listing to become effective upon expiration of any existing exclusive listing.
So we just had this with currently listed seller just contacted one of our agents to have a conversation, and she's like, what can I talk about and what can I not talk about? I said, first of all, you have to make it very clear that you're not here to convince them to list it right now. In fact, that would be tortiously interfering with the current real estate company's contract. I said, you can go out to the property, you can tell them that you'd be happy to come out and talk to them about how you can help them, but you cannot actually help them and list the property until after the contract is expired.
And remember what Stacey just said, he called you.
Yes.
But you have to be very careful to reiterate to him that even though he has called and asked questions, that you still really cannot interfere with that relationship. We did read through that. Jordan.
Just
Standard of practice 16.5. Realtors shall not solicit buyer tenants agreements from buyer tenants who are subject to exclusive buyer tenant agreements. However, if asked by a realtor, the broker refuses to disclose the expiration date of the exclusive buyer tenant agreement, the realtor may contract the buyer tenant to secure such information and may discuss the terms upon which the realtor might enter into a future buyer-tenant agreement, or alternatively, may enter into a buyer-tenant agreement to become effective upon the expiration of any existing exclusive buyer-tenant agreement.
So that's the exact same whole thing except in a tenant situation. I don't know, how would you ever know the expiration of a lease? But again, if somebody contacts you, if the tenant contacts you and...
Don't take them.
Yeah.
Please, if you have to chase expired rentals, please call me. I'll help you.
She'll talk
Find
you,
another way
she'll
to
talk
get
you right out of
business.
it. On unlisted property, realtors acting as buyer-tenant representatives or brokers shall disclose that relationship to the seller landlord at first contact for that buyer-tenant and shall provide written confirmation of such disclosure to the seller landlord not later than the execution of any purchaser or lease agreement. Realtors shall make any request for anticipated compensation from the seller landlord at first contact. So that's obviously talking about for sale by owner. Realtors acting as representatives or brokers of seller landlords shall disclose that relationships to buyer tenants as soon as practicable shall provide written confirmation of such disclosure to buyer tenants not later than the execution of any purchase and sale agreement. Any comment on that? They're trying to cover so much and sometimes it gets intense here. Again, it's
Yeah, we have agency disclosure, so you're supposed to disclose right away who you're representing.
and we went over that
Yeah.
day one. Remember, it's all dealings concerning property exclusively listed or with buyer tenants who are subject to an exclusive agreement shall be carried on with the client's representative or broker and not with the client, except with the consent of the client's representative or broker, or except where such dealings are initiated by the client. I've had people say to me, can I talk directly to the seller? Or why can't I talk directly to the seller? And I'm like, no, that's why we have seller agents and buyer agents, that they will be your representative. Before providing substantive services such as writing a purchase offer or presenting CMAs to prospects, realtors shall ask prospects whether they are a party to any exclusive representation agreement, meaning if they're already in the contract. Realtors shall not knowingly provide substantive services concerning the prospective transaction to prospects who are parties to exclusive representation agreements, except with the consent of the prospect's exclusive representatives or at the direction of prospects. So again, the confidentiality comes into play with that as well. Oh, I think that's it. That's the end of it.
I have some notes I want to talk
Yes.
about.
Good.
All right, I took notes throughout this regarding, I want to talk about some of the things that she covered through the Code of Ethics, and I know I missed the Procuring Cause program, but I wanted to point out a couple things. Number one, Article 1, I wanted to talk about, I forget exactly which article under Article 1, but you have a duty to kind of take care of the property that you have listed. Just something to think about that I just want to fill in, because we have a lot of situations that have come up over 20 years now that I've owned a brokerage, that I know specifically which issues I've seen people run in. It's not that, it was article, let me just see, maybe it was not article 1.
Oh, it was about the care of the premises?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which one was that? Anyways, there is one of the articles talks about taking care of the premises that you have listed. This is something to think about if you are dealing with a vacant property. So several years ago, we had a property that we were representing, and the people had moved out of the property. And long story short, the cold weather came about, the heating system had stopped working, ends up frozen pipes, and the sellers of the property basically said, well, it was you guys were the ones that were showing the property. You should have known that the property heat had shut off. So just something.
111.
Okay, so it's standard of practice 111. Realtors who are employed to maintain or manage a client's property shall exercise due diligence and make reasonable efforts to protect against reasonably foreseeable contingencies and losses. At the end of the day, on that particular one, we weren't hired to manage the property. We were hired to sell the property, so we didn't have any losses from it. But if you have a vacant property, just think about, like, is there somebody checking on it? At least have the conversation with the seller and say, hey, we're not responsible. Just make sure that you have somebody that's going over to the property. As well, for vacant properties, talk to your sellers about making sure it's shoveled and plowed, because it's also possible that people can get hurt on a property.
I've been in that situation.
Secondly, I don't know if we covered it in one of these. You are not supposed to market properties that are not your listings unless you have permission from the other agent that says you can market the property. Just want to point it out because I see people violate this all the time on social media. They're just sharing properties of all different agents, of all different companies. You're not supposed to do that unless you've asked the other agent for permission. And you're supposed to also make it clear that it's not your listing, because you could be misrepresenting.
So, yes, so could you talk about that in relationship to open houses? When another agent has asked you to do an open house, how you can put their listing saying, I'm doing an open house.
Yes, I think all of it, like, you can, first of all, if you have permission of the other agent, by all means, you can share their listings on social media, but it's supposed to be apparent to anybody looking on who the actual listing agent is. Secondly, yes, so Sam already has one.
Sam.
We provide these on the Career Den, but we have what's called host-only disclosures. So if you are, many of our
Turn around,
agents,
you can show it.
There you go.
many agents do host open houses for other agents in the company. And what I want to point out is that if you are hosting an open house for another agent of the company, you should have the disclosure that lets people know coming in that I'm a host only. I'm not representing the seller of the property. That's number one. Number two, check your little sign-in sheet, because sometimes those sign-in sheets at the bottom say that you represent the seller. So make sure your sign-in sheet says that you represent, it could say nothing, by the way, the sign-in sheet, but make sure at least it's accurate. If you're not representing the seller, you should let them know. Also, you should let your seller know. So the seller, you want the seller, if you are the listing agent and you're having other agents do the open house for you, it is imperative that you also let that seller know that the person who's hosting the open house does not represent that seller. The reason for that is because sometimes a host of an open house is meeting the seller before the open house, going through the property. That seller could be disclosing to this host information that could later be used, because that host agent brings a buyer in and now has information. They have no representation with that seller. And so you don't want your seller telling this host, oh, by the way, we need to get this sold this weekend. My husband and I just got transferred. We're moving next week. So it's important for our listing agents that are using hosts for their open houses that they have the conversation with the seller. The third thing I want you to think about is that if you're a listing team, typically only one person on that team is actually representing the seller of the property, not all the team members. So again, your seller might actually believe that all the members of the team are representing the seller of the property, and that is typically not the case. I tell teams that I think it's a good idea. There's a little place on the listing sheet where you can note who is actually representing the seller of the property, and then say these people, even though members of the team, are not representing the seller of the property. So just really important little things to think about, because these are the things that, if you think about it from a consumer's point of view, the consumer thinks that, hey, if you get a team member coming in, I would assume that they're representing me just like the team leader, and that is definitely not the case.
We have a question.
Yeah.
The question is it okay for us to share the LAER hot sheet listings?
Again, if you're sharing a listing that's on the LAER hot sheet as a LAER agent, you're still supposed to have the permission of the agent. So I think it's not a bad idea. By the way, if you sent a quick text or email to every agent in our company, I'd say most of them are going to just say, yeah, no problem. I want as much exposure as possible. But according to the rules, you are supposed to have permission from the agent in order to share any listing, even if it's within our own company. The next thing I wanted to point out, which we already really talked about this, but you will get calls in your career from sellers who right now their property is listed. So if their property is right now listed with another company, just be very particular about your dialogue with that seller. You by all means can go do a market analysis, but you have to make it very clear to that seller that I am not here, I cannot work with you during the term of this contract. So anything we talk about is for at a future time. Once this contract is expired, I can help you market and list the property. Another interesting fact, I have lists of these because of all the different things we run into, and we call the MAR legal hotline. By the way, if you ever have an issue at LAER Realty, it could be a procuring cause issue. It could be anything. You can send that, whatever your issue is, send it to happyagent@laerrealty.com. We're going to try to answer it for you. We have a lot of experience because we have 500 agents, and every day there's something that's happened in the company. So we have like a little war chest of all the different scenarios we've seen. But we also, as a brokerage, have access to the Mass Association of Realtors legal hotline. And so when we don't know the answer to the problem, we have like a direct phone line to the Mass Association of Realtors attorneys, and they'll tell us how to handle the situation. Well, one such situation that we had recently is we had, it was our buyer, and it was a property listed with another company, and it was a multi-bid situation, and our agent's offer was rejected, and our agent asked that the rejection be signed by the seller. So at the bottom of the offer form, there is a little place where the seller can check approved or accepted or rejected, and our agent asked the list agent for a signed rejection letter. And the selling agent said, my seller does not want to sign that. So they're not going to sign your rejection, but You could take my word for it. The contract has been rejected. We called the Mass Association of Realtors to say, can we require that other side? Because really, our agent wanted just proof that their offer had been seen.
Yes.
And the Mass Association of Realtors said that the seller has the right to not sign the rejection. So just something to think about. By the way, I do encourage you that go check out the Mass Association of Realtors website when you have some time. There's all kinds of cool resources. One of my favorite resources on the Mass Association website is they have a little section called Notes from the Legal Hotline. And because they get all day long questions, these weird questions that come through there. And so if you go to that blog, you're going to see like some of the weird stuff that has come through. But a couple other things I wanted to point out. And these are all from either instances we've had in our own company or just through the Mass Association of Realtors legal hotline. So this happens at least 5 times a year. We do 3,000 transactions at least 5 times a year. I have seen situations where you're going back and forth, you're representing a buyer, another person is representing the seller, and you're all excited. They came back and said, we've accepted your offer. And you call your client and say, I'm so excited. You got your offer accepted. You got the house. And then 2 hours later, you get a call from that listing agent and they said, we're so sorry to tell you, they took another offer. After they verbally accepted your offer, they went and took a better offer. So there is something called the statute of frauds. The statute of frauds says that all transactions involving real estate must be in writing. So a verbal deal is a no-go in real estate. So it is a good practice to never say it's like the deal's done until you actually have something from the other side that has acknowledged acceptance of the offer. Because if you don't have that, you really do not have a leg to stand on, and it can make you look bad that you went and told somebody that their offer was accepted because you thought their offer was accepted because you were told that. But in reality, if you do not have that signed offer, really you have nothing. So something to think about for your business. Let's see. I also wanted to talk about this is a can of worms, and this is something that we're all going to you will run into in your business. And let's say you're listing a property and your seller client is unsure if property permits were obtained for finishing their basement or all kinds of host of other things. But you notice that as they're taking you through the listing that you're about to sign up, they proudly tell you how last year they went through and they themselves finished the basement and they didn't get permits. So this is from the Mass Association of Realtors hotline. And basically it says the state building code requires a building permit for construction, reconstruction, alteration, repair, demolition, removal, or change in use of occupancy of buildings and structures. What I want you guys to think about, if you know that the property has not had permits, like potentially this can be a massive can of worms. Like potentially we've seen people have to dismantle like in-laws, dismantle work that had been done.
Third floors.
Anything. There's a million. I mean, if they've done stuff that is not permitted, the best practice is to go to the town and figure out what you can do to bring your property into compliance. So that means like getting the permits and having somebody come out and inspect and make sure that the all the work was done to code. If you know for sure that permits have not been pulled, you're supposed to disclose that to let the other side know. Also, what Mass Association of Realtors likes to point out is that Massachusetts law requires you to do smoke inspections prior to closing, and that they say the fire inspectors for that smoke, they are trained in each town to also check to make sure that the property is up to code. So it is possible that even that your property did not have the proper permits for the work that was done, and the buyers don't really notice, and everything gets approved, and it looks like it's going to go to closing, and nobody really cares that we don't have permits for the finished basement. And then the inspection is done a week before closing to get your smoke detector, and that fireman comes through and says, I can't approve it because it looks like you have a newly finished basement and there's no permits for it. So that's where it could come up at the very last minute. Let's see. I also took some notes only because I made a very quick statement earlier about if you see a property that, like when you're writing an offer on a property and you can see that the property had come on the market, off the market, on the market, off the market, one of the things I said is that you should ask the other real estate agent why it came on and off the market. So there's certain stuff you can keep close to the vest. However, if through an inspection you know that there is an issue with the property, so a home inspection has been done and that home inspection discloses that there is something major wrong with the property, if it is something that it would affect a buyer's buying decision on that property, you are supposed to disclose it. So, were you asking a question?
Never go, as the listing agent, never be at the home inspection and never ask for what's wrong with the property.
So this is very interesting because I just had this whole conversation with another brokerage. We had it was our buyer and it was their listing. So this other company's listing, and our buyer did a home inspection. There was a multitude of issues on the property, and so our buyer backed out of the transaction and wanted their earnest money back. The other brokerage said, we're not giving you your money back. We require that you give us the home inspection. So I said, first of all, why would you want it?
Yeah.
Like, you should absolutely not want the home inspection. Anyways, long story short, they would not release the deposit without it. I think if we had fought it, we could have. I mean, we're not required to give anybody a copy of our inspection. That is not part of the agreement that we had. However, I tried to say to that agent, like, I have zero idea why you would want this inspection, because it is not going to help you and it is not going to help your seller. So, but you can have at it. We gave them the home inspection.
So is it an ethical thing that they have to disclose the newly found issues with the property after a home inspection for, in that case, the listing agent, or is it a legal matter?
Technically can be both. It falls under Chapter 93A, which is a mass consumer protection disclosure. So, and by the way, the Chapter 93A is something where somebody could get triple damages for whatever the issue is. So you just want to be careful, and I'm trying to find the exact.
We're on page 24 of the manual, in case you want to see it.
So disclosure is limited to facts actually known by an agent, not just a rumor or a suspicion. Chapter 93A requires that a real estate agent volunteer these facts, even if not asked. It is recommended that these disclosures be made in writing so it is clear as to when and to whom the disclosures were made. And I just want to go to Chapter 93A provides that it is a violation when an agent fails to disclose to a buyer or prospective buyer any fact, the disclosure of which may have influenced the buyer or prospective buyer not to enter into the transaction. So you want to be super careful with home inspections and stuff like that. I'm with you, Sam. Like, I wouldn't attend a home inspection. Like, if it's your listing, let your buyer, agent, and their buyer go do the home inspection. They do make a note in here that just because home inspection, like a home inspection is not always gospel. Like, there is some of it that is kind of opinion. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I just think as a listing agent, you shouldn't want another buyer's home inspection. Now, I will also say that if they tell you that the reason why my buyers backed out of the property is because there's a major issue. There's massive termite damage on the support beam in the basement. Now, you don't have the inspection for that, but the fact that they told you that, I would then have a conversation with the seller and say, it sounds like there's a massive issue with the support beam in the basement. And next step would be to get your own expert out there to figure out if it is something that you should be disclosing. I think that's it. Do you guys have any questions? I can answer. I know you guys already did procure and cause and stuff, but if you have questions on that or the code of ethics, these were the main things that I wanted to at least point out, because it's stuff that we've had issues with our agents.
That was great. Thank you, Stacey.
Okay, awesome. Anything else? What time is the program till?
3 o'clock.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
Okay, well, thank you.
By the way, we got a huge comment on here that having everybody speak was excellent and very powerful. So,
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Class
Thank you for coming and
participation.
staying so late.